adventure out beyond the furthest boundary. I'll be searching for the spirit that can set me free. Well, I've been caught in the clutter of the day today, and I've been waiting for that spark to come and sweep me away. On the wave of an ecstasy to a brand new reality, where fantastic worlds open up in a dazzling display. Setting out on a journey of discovery, through the doorway that opens to the mystery. An adventure out beyond the furthest boundary. I'll be searching for the spirit that can set me free. Some people say the spirit doesn't exist, and if it comes to them they just resist. Then they come up with some theory to explain it away. But if they only had the eyes to see the depth and power of the mystery, then they would know that it goes far beyond the things they say. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. The truth is stranger than our wildest thoughts can conceive. There are dimensions far beyond this normal world we perceive. There are revelations and epiphanies. There are visionary possibilities. All that's required is the courage just to take the leap, and then setting out on a journey of discovery. Through the doorway that opens to the mystery. An adventure out beyond the furthest boundary. I'll be searching for the spirit that can set me free. Setting out on a journey of discovery. 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 Setting out on a journey of discovery.
So we sort of had something going before lunch. Can anybody remember what it was?
Oh, well, I had a question.
It was the hallucinogenic snuff used by the Yanomami.
Yeah, and hadn't we done that? We've done that. Let's not do that again.
Are you still doing questions?
Sure, yeah.
I got one I'd like to toss around. The whole idea of the shaman as having this hyperdimensional overview, and as you say, some of them say, it scares me shitless, even the top dog. Okay? And other times what you said, you wonder why it isn't in headlines 11 inches tall. There seems to be something about the experience that is, I don't know if self-selecting is the right word, or evolutionary selecting. Why is there such a small percentage of people who actually end up, although you say everyone can do it, they do have the genetic possibility, but there's something more in the selective period that where a shaman will come out, because it is, as you say, an awesome responsibility, and yet it's everyone's possible liberation. And then one last thing, another coda to this. You mentioned that you don't think that it's the Bush or Reagan, etc., feeling that they just want to keep an economic grip as far as the sale of would-be hallucinogenics. Don't you think that there is some degree of teleological repression going on as well? I mean, you mentioned that you didn't feel that way, but I somehow other times I've heard you feel that there definitely is.
Well, I think that, yeah, I mean, it simplifies the issue to say that it's entirely a money issue.
Right.
Because the psychedelics are used by so small
right.
a percentage of people that it doesn't rate the tremendous institutional fury that is brought against it, and where you really see the contradiction in economic logic is with pot. I think that the subtext of the government's fear about psychedelics is that this quality that they have of dissolving boundaries causes people to question basic assumptions about how society is run. And I think this is true of any society. It isn't an American phenomenon. It's that if you take psychedelics, whatever you are, you know, Eskimo, Hasidic rabbi, quantum physicist, you will question your first premises. And you get millions of people questioning the first premises, and then the powers that be become very nervous. It's interesting that this whole phenomenon of the 1960s occurred because American commitment to universal public education brought its first generation of people to adulthood in the middle of the 1960s, because that universal commitment to public education began after World War II. After the establishment took a look at what this filling, actually funding and building up great public universities and then filling them with inquisitive young people, what the result of that was, that's when they decided to turn the universities back into trade schools for CPAs, which they did do. I mean, there is nothing like the level and the breadth of education and intellectual curiosity that was encouraged when I was going to school. That's all finished now. Now you're expected to do your data entry job, watch a lot of TV, and keep your mouth shut. And this is what we expect of our college graduates. So really there was a crisis of faith in American institutions, which was only exacerbated by psychedelics. It was a combination of educating people to the actual traditions of Western civilization in large numbers for the first time, and then giving them psychedelics. Or having them exposed to psychedelics, and people began to ask questions for which there were no answers. And the response of the establishment was to suppress this. I mentioned cannabis. You're all probably aware through the work of the hemp people that cannabis holds many benefits, not necessarily related to its properties as an intoxicant, but as a source of food, lubricant, plastics, fuels, etc. The reason the establishment is so hysterical on the subject of cannabis is because it erodes loyalty to the industrial state. I mean, that's why, if you look at the pharmacological profile, let's contrast two familiar drugs. One, caffeine. We have the medical data which shows that it can contribute to fetal malformation. We know that it damages the liver. We know that it, if abused, can cause severe stomach ulcers, so forth and so on. Cannabis, and vast amounts of money have been spent trying to find something wrong with it, and they're still digging, folks. I mean, they've decided it doesn't cause tits on statues. It doesn't, all the screwy things they've come up with over the years have had to be abandoned. Why is caffeine enshrined in every labor contract negotiated in the Western world as a sacred right of all workers twice daily? And why is cannabis, you can lose your house, your automobile, your bank account, your art collection, simply because you had 6 plants in the back 40, and your children. Why this disparity? Well, what is the effect of caffeine? It makes it possible for you to perform your duties during the last 3 hours of the work cycle with efficiency equal to the first 3 hours of the work cycle. It allows people to tolerate spinning widgets onto gombers until hell freezes over without a thought ever rising in their mind that maybe this is a ridiculous way to spend your life. Cannabis, on the other hand, people aren't so interested in going to work. They'd rather lay around and make love. They don't want to watch TV. They'd rather smoke a doobie and have a conversation with a friend. In other words, these things promote activities which don't make anybody any money and cause people to question the institutions and the social philosophies that are being shoved down their throats. If the playing field were level, caffeine might well be a prescription drug, not that I think that's a good idea, and cannabis, I think, would probably be freely available. The most dangerous drugs in society in terms of detrimental social impact are alcohol and tobacco, the two most freely available. I mean, every street corner of every city, they're peddled in vast amounts. We have a very crack-brained approach to the problem of drugs. We're not the only society. All societies seem to do this. Out of a possible spectrum of 20 or 30 depressants and intoxicants, most societies select 3 or 4 which they hail as harmless, and then the rest are, the seed of Satan. And this attitude is persevered in against all scientific data, against all medical research. This is just what people choose to think. The problem is we don't have the luxury of this kind of ignorance anymore. The amount of revenue that could be accrued from cannabis economy, the pressure that could be taken off petroleum extraction if cannabis were part of the picture. All of these things make it incumbent upon us, I think, to think more creatively and more honestly about which drugs really are posing problems for us. What was the first part?
The other question really relates to this is, why are there, given the fact, why is the percentage of shamans so small relative to a population? Because of the fact that, as you say, there's fear in going into, there's attraction and fear in going into these other realms. And there's obviously maybe some self-limiting aspect of the hyper-dimensional view, which there's some dynamic going on because everyone has an equal opportunity to go to this hyperdimensional, but very few of their own initiative really push to that point where you are definitely within the hyperdimensional realm.
Well, there are different things to be said about this. I mean, first of all, There are what are called biochemical differences in individuality, and never more so than in the matter of drugs. People are very different from each other. Years ago, I took a course from Sasha Shulgin at Cal, and at one point he brought in some substance, I don't know what it was, and this was a class of 600 people, and passed it around and asked everybody to take a sniff of this bottle. Well, 598 people pronounced this stuff completely odorless. 2 people were almost violently ill from the overpowering odor of this thing. They possessed a gene for the sensitivity to this compound that caused it to be for them overwhelming, for everyone else unnoticeable. And we're surrounded by these kinds of individual biochemical differences. In traditional societies, shamanism is often a family business, and it may well be that this is because ability to handle these psychedelic substances and to really get mileage out of them is a genetic endowment of some sort. I mean, cannabis, again, it provides an interesting example. One of the commonest things you hear people say about cannabis who don't smoke it is they say, I used to, or I tried it, but it makes me paranoid. To the people who use it, this is inconceivable. In fact, it's almost an antidote to paranoia, because it seems to make things appear more Taoistic, more integrated. It all makes more sense. These are biochemical differences that need to be studied. You know, different racial groups have different relationships to intoxication. I mean, I think there is some truth to the idea that the North American Indians had a susceptibility to distilled alcohol that the Europeans, who had been dealing with it for a couple of centuries by the time they arrived here, didn't have, because the North American Indians represented a closed gene pool, never having been exposed to this. There was no selection for being able to handle it. And then there's another issue in relation to your question, John, which is, first of all, you know, some people say, well, not all shamans take hallucinogens. Well, true, and I've excited some people's ire by suggesting, but all real shamans do. And, you know, saying that somebody is a shaman, I mean, imagine if simply being able to rave and exhort on the subject of the 4 Gospels qualified you as a man of the Lord. Actually, you have to sort through dozens of so-called preachers to find somebody you would be willing to leave alone with your chickens. Well, similarly, you have to sort through a lot of people who claim to be shamans before you find somebody who really is one. I mean, if we tend to be naive, go to the Amazon with your heart on your sleeve seeking ayahuasca, and I guarantee, unless you go well connected, you'll drink a lot of swill before you get to somebody honest enough, responsible enough, conscientious enough to actually make it right and do it right. And in the case of shamanism, usually this is going on in cultures without literacy, without written languages, and so they don't hold conferences or publish proceedings or have the university matriculation examinations in shamanism. So on the surface, a shaman is anyone who claims to be a shaman or who cares to claim. But in terms of real shamanic ability, I think it only comes through either innate special abilities, which probably means innate high sensitivity to neurological, to neurotransmitters, exotic neurotransmitters, or it comes through an exposure to hallucinogens. This is a big argument in anthropology. Mircea Eliade, who normally I am very deferent to, got this one completely wrong and decided on absolutely no evidence that what he called narcotic shamanism was decadent. Well, first of all, the use of the word narcotic in that context shows that he didn't know what he was talking about. Nobody uses narcotics to shamanize. You go to sleep if you take narcotics. So what he wanted to say was that he felt hallucinogenic shamanism was decadent, but what is the alternative? Reliance on ordeals, fasting, or pathological personalities, maybe epileptics or borderline schizophrenics or something like that. I think that these kinds of shamanisms that are not hallucinogenically based are derivative shamanisms that occur at a later stage of culture when the plant-based shamanism has been disrupted by some factor like migration or the disappearance of the plants involved or something like that. Yeah.
From what I understand, the Lakota Indians didn't use hallucinogenics. They accomplished all this through, the drum beat and the song and things like that. And to this day, if you talk to the Lakota about the use of hallucinogenics as far as their shamans go, they say it's not necessary. And yet in the Southwest, it's prominent.
Yeah, well,
right on.
I think acoustical driving can carry you a certain distance. There are substitutes for hallucinogens, but they're neither as effective nor as pleasant. I mean, ordeals are what many cultures get into.
Well, I was just thinking, along the lines of, someone like Crazy Horse who came out of Lakota who seemed to possess these, abilities and manifest them physically.
Well, there's also the exceptional personality. The exceptional personality breaks all the rules, see. But, something I wanted to say.
So would you say then, Terence, that there's a genetic proclivity, maybe in some individuals, if there is access to botanicals, and if there is no historical evidence of shamanism prior to that, for that individual to start engaging in explorations?
Yeah, I think so. Maria Sabina claimed that she was never initiated into shamanism. She claimed that as a girl herding the cattle, she ate the mushrooms because she was hungry, and that she was basically self-taught in shamanism in a society that actually had shamanic lineages and institutions. In Madagascar, there are these highly evolved ordeal poisons, and this is where you take a plant, you feel like you're dying, you beg to die, you want to die, and you don't die. You come back from it a better person, but it is only because you were slammed up against death itself. Ordeals work, but they're not very pleasant, and the idea of putting yourself through an ideal like that once a week or twice a month as part of your professional practice is pretty outrageous. The other thing that has to be said, and this is really important, and I think anthropologists have sold this one short. Experiences are what we are least able to communicate to each other. We can describe machine parts, agricultural procedures, but anything in the realm of feeling, our languages are woefully impoverished, and I don't think that's specific to English. I think it haunts all human experience, that it's hard to communicate how we feel. Well, so then there's a vast spectrum of experiences that come from plants, and I dare say most of them unpleasant. Let's start out with eating Dieffenbachia or something, which causes your throat tissues to swell up and you feel like you're strangling. Or, Amanita muscaria is a very controversial shamanic plant because some people say it's garbage, and Gordon Wasson in his last book called it the supreme entheogen of all time. Well, clearly people are they talking about different things, or are they interpreting the same experience differently? And so there are, for example, people who are fond of peyote, like, if they haven't done their homework, like to imagine that they are taking this ancient hallucinogen that has informed the lives of the Sonoran and the Indians of that area for thousands and thousands of years. Well, this is, as far as anybody can tell, complete bunk. There is no record of peyote use older than 400 or 500 years. Most of it is post-ghost dance. When you go into the old Sonoran graves, the old archaeology of the Sonoran, the Tarahumara Indians, you find Socorus secundifolia beans, the little black and red beans that you see in Mexico strung into jewelry sold along the side of the roads. That's what those Indians took for thousands and thousands of years. We have a continuous record over about 4,000 years of these seeds being buried in graves with ritual instruments indicating that they were buried with shamans. You couldn't give it away today because it is such a horrible experience. It's essentially sublethal strychnine poisoning. It can kill you effortlessly. It's clear that at some point, fairly recently, somebody tried peyote and said, my God, this stuff we've been taking for thousands and thousands of years is just horrible compared to this. This is great. And immediately there was a transfer of loyalty. And Lord knows, eating fresh peyote is no gourmet undertaking. So the point there being, cultures tend to define experiences differently, and you can't tell what people are talking about until you really check in. Traveling around the world, you end up in certain cultures and they say, oh, we're so happy to have you here. As our honored guest, we would like you to eat some of our national food. Let's say you're in Scotland, and so they say, well, you must eat some haggis because this is what we all eat. We all really love this. This is the best part of Scottish life. Boy, are you going to love this. Well, when it's finally served, your jaw drops in disbelief because it's ghastly unless you're Scotch. And well, but if you're Scotch, you dare not say so, you see, because a cultural myth has been built up around. I mean, do Italians knock red wine? Do the French denounce truffles? Certainly not.
How do you know the origin of Scotch?
True. Pâté de foie gras is always my example of it. So what you have to realize is that these things are culturally defined, and often what works for the Yanomamo or the Muinani or the Witoto won't work for you. Datura is a good example. Datura is a shamanic plant used by many people throughout the world. All of them, I think, pharmacologically deprived. Otherwise, they wouldn't put up with what you have to put up with to take that stuff, you know. And my interest, and it was practical, was to find a hallucinogen that did what I wanted it to do and didn't do anything I didn't want it to do. And what I was interested in was, first of all, hallucinations, because some people say I'm obsessed with it. Fine. My notion is that if you can see something that isn't there, that's very much more convincing than just funny thoughts, racing ideas, strange physical sensations. It's a powerful and boundary-dissolving confrontation when you confront what is not there. And so I find, and this is a heresy for sure, I'm not that fond of LSD. I think it's a very sloppy drug. I think, you feel terrible the next day. I always did. I had tight headaches, body ache. People always say, well, it was not clean, it had speed in it, it had strychnine in it. Maybe, but even the good stuff is not, and it wouldn't hallucinate for me the way I wanted it to. I could get hallucinations if I would smoke hash with it, but on its own, it was what I have described in other places as abrasively psychoanalytic, unpleasant, confrontational. And what I was interested in were hallucinations. So when I got to psilocybin, I remember after my first mushroom trip, I said, thank God we found this stuff. I'll never take LSD again. That wasn't quite true, but I'll bet I've taken it less than half a dozen times since my first psilocybin trip. So, and in terms of the chemistry of these things, my conclusion from all this fiddling is that it's the indole hallucinogens that are at the center of the mandala. They do what we want them to do with very little detrimental side effects. LSD is one of them. Ibogaine is one of them, not one widely known. We got to save something for our old age, folks. Harmine and harmaline, the beta-carbolines, when complexed with DMT, and then psilocybin, and I think that's the basic list. Well, those these are really the keys which open the lock very easily, very cleanly, very dependably, and that's where I would put all of my attention. And even in that domain, you have to be somewhat careful. My brother and I spent years tracking down a hallucinogen in the Amazon called ukuhe that was an orally active form of DMT, which remember I said that DMT is destroyed in the gut. So we were fascinated to try and find this ukuhe because we wanted to know how it was possible that it could work orally. And also the ethnographic accounts claimed that the people who used it spoke with little men. And we wanted to see these little men, to see if they were the same little men we were trying to. Well, we had 3 expeditions to the Amazon before we finally closed in on this stuff. And when we finally got it, with this tremendous sense of having attained the grail and having finally this was going to do it, this was going to be the one, then we took this stuff And my God, it turned us every way but loose. Your heart feels like it's pounding its way out of the front of your chest. You vomit. You have tremoring of the limbs, on and on and on. So we go through this, live through it, wash off in the river and go looking for the shaman to lodge a complaint. And he says, yeah, well, it's hard to get used to. And so then when we get it back home to the lab and do the high-pressure gas chromatography and all the rest of it and see what's really there, you see that the genetic component of the Varroa trees from which this resin is extracted it's a mess. It's too many tryptamines. DMT, DET, 5-monomethyltryptamine, 5-MAO DMT, and several other cardioactive tryptamines. It looked like they'd swept the floor of an Indol chemist's lab to put together the components of this plant. You don't want this. You don't, because it's like taking 10 drugs at once. You know, it's all running together. You can't tell whether you're Agnes or Angus. What you want is a DMT source where when you put it in the gas chromatograph, you get one spike, that's N-dimethyltryptamine, and all the rest is cellulose, a little DNA, and that's all, some minerals and salt. If you don't have a clean source, then, you know, it's contaminated. So even that legendary shamanic hallucinogen, when actually put to the use test, wasn't able to pass it. Yeah.
Yes, going back to the DMT and mushroom psilocybin, you were talking about taking psilocybin and then doing breath control is indistinguishable from a DMT trip. If you do it correctly, you can coax it. Since this is a learning tree and you're sort of in front there, maybe you could give us an idea of what it's like to coax 5 grams into an, I mean, I'm sure you won't be able to give us all the information, but maybe you can sort of enlighten us a little bit and we can sort of work in that direction. At least I can work in that direction.
Oh, you mean how do you get the peak of a psilocybin trip to deliver you into DMT land?
Yes, because sometimes I get a little jealous hearing you talk about DMT trip, and I sit here and say, you know, I want to find that stuff, and you know, anyway, so.
Well, the thing is, psilocybin will take you there if you have the courage and the stamina to tolerate the duration of the psilocybin revelation.
Thank you.
First of all, you take a heroic dose, 5, 6, 7 grams. Then, when you're peaking, you smoke cannabis. Then, you sit in silent darkness, alone, because I think the presence of other people always pins you to the surface with this stuff. I mean, you don't need somebody else.
And no matter if they're talking or not, they can just be in the room and you're aware of that.
Just sitting there, then this is a different thing.
Yeah.
Breathing, exhaling, breathing, exhaling, and then you form an intention for it to approach you. I mean, you say, I can feel it. I mean, it's almost it's a neighborhood. It's a pharmacological neighborhood. And you know how you may go to Little Italy, but there are no Italians on the street. But if you start, you have to somehow shake them out of the nest. And you simply ask for them to appear. I always hark back to that episode of I Love Lucy, where she and Ethel are discussing how to contact the space people, and Lucy tells Ethel, she says, well, I just say, come in, little green men, come in, little green men. And yeah, it's a big laugh now, but try it on 25 milligrams of psilocybin.
Reference to they, what they want, they are trying to create touch on your view of they. Plus, I'd be grateful to know what your view at this point is of the whole UFO and contact team. I'm not sure which of those questions comes first.
Well, the they of the DMT thing is these entities which you contact, although they may turn out to be toys created by someone unseen who is in fact in charge of this hyperdimensional maternity ward. But these toys, if that's what they are essentially teaching machines of some sort. They're trying to get you to perform this linguistic activity. As far as the UFO thing is concerned, I think it's well, it sort of requires some backgrounding. I think that there's something fundamentally wrong with our understanding of the world. Fundamentally wrong. And what it is that we believe that the past creates the present. That the present is the sum total of actions and situations that exist in the past. In other words, we believe that the horse pushes the cart. The horse doesn't push the cart. The cart is pulled. There is an attractor in the future. There is actually, I think of history as a bowl down whose slope we are making our way. Well, since we are in a situation where conservation of energy is important, where are we all going to end up? The bottom of the bowl, obviously. That's, if you release a marble up on the rim, it's going to make its way down the bowl to what's called the dwell point, the place where the energy requirements are such that the forward momentum of the falling ball is satisfied by meeting the resistance of the bottom of the bowl. History is like this. We are being pulled forward by an attractor. It has somehow come into the human world and has pulled us out of animal organization. If this attractor were not present, we would still probably be cheerfully slinging excrement around in the canopy of some jungle tree. But because of the attractor, we have been pulled into social organization, technology, language, community, so forth and so on. And mystics and seers and visionaries are people who have a relationship to this attractor that is different from the rest of us. They can glimpse aspects of this thing. And when I think of it this way, I always think of those the mirrored ball that they hang over the bar in a disco, and then they spin it and it throws reflections of light all over the room from the ambient lighting. Well, history is like this. The attractor at the end of time, which is below the event horizon of the present and thus impossible to anticipate its true form, sends back through time distorted reflections of itself. which, if you are struck by one of these distorted reflections, well, then you begin to preach and cure, and local conditions may damp your activity, and then you're what's called a nut. But if, in fact, local conditions support your activity so that you become a meme spreader, then you're suddenly a Messiah, a teacher, a Buddha, a Christ, a Mohammed. That's what these people were. They were people who were, for reasons mysterious to themselves, I'm sure, in a relationship of resonance with the transcendental object, such that they, in a sense, embodied it. Well, in our own era, because of technology, and Jung was on to this when he wrote his book in 1948 called Flying Saucers, a Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Sky. He said, the flying saucer is an image of the self that haunts the skies of Earth as a compensatory effect to our alienation. Well, I think that that's exactly what's going on, except that he didn't realize how nuts and bolts that explanation was. The UFO is a mirage being cast backward into time by the transcendental object at the end of time. And that's why it has such a hair-raising aura of weirdness about it. It isn't a ship from another star system. I mean, how could anyone reasonably entertain that idea, given the distances in time and what you find when you get here? I mean, who would make that trip who had any reasonable way to spend their time? It's a compensatory image that haunts time, because time is a kind of hologram. Time is a fractal. And fractal means that the same pattern is embedded again and again in a relationship of self-similarity. So, because the transcendental object exists somewhere ahead of us in history, there must necessarily be a tiny part of it somewhere nearby. And this is what the UFO is, I think. And this is why nobody's ever going to show you a chunk of it, and they're never going to put an extraterrestrial on network television, because it isn't that kind of a creature. It's a compensatory image from the end of time. This leads me to an aspect of what I wanted to talk about, what I very briefly and obliquely indicated this morning, which was when I was talking about how we're halfway through history, but the rest of it has to happen in only 30 years. I think that we're moving towards something called concrescence. This isn't my word, it's Alfred North Whitehead's word. I think you can tell what it means. It means everything melts together into one thing. I think that from the very birth of the universe, this is bigger than the human species, bigger than the life of the earth. From the very first moments of the universe's existence, it has been itself under the domain, under the influence of an attractor. And this attractor is pulling everything into tighter and tighter states of self-reflective resonance. And that now we are very close to this concrescent event. And that in fact human history, I called it the shock wave of eschatology, but I didn't talk much about what eschatology is, because, well, first of all, it lies below the event horizon of the present historical epoch, but it won't always. It could rise above the horizon at any time. 2000, 1996, you name it. But we have been too long under the spell of the idea that only the past creates the present. The present is actually largely created by appetite for the future. And this would seem to me a highly improbable idea had I not taken psychedelics and gotten this hyperdimensional view of the system that we're living in. And then you can see that, yes, history is not a random walk. It's not a series of undirected random fluctuations. History is a process of fractal self-complexification that builds on whatever it has achieved. And so upon the complexity of animal organization is laying the complexity of human language. Upon the complexity of human language is laid the complexity of symbolic signification of that language, i.e. writing. Upon writing is laid electronic technology, and so forth and so on. So we are, in a sense, in the act of giving birth to or creating the object of our theologies, which is a kind of god or goddess, depending on, how you slice into it, how you feel about it. And the UFO is simply an indicator that we are so close now to encountering the concrescent transcendental object that it's able to haunt the skies of Earth and the imaginations of people who live in trailer parks. This is, you have to remember that history itself is a violation of the laws of nature, and history and its consequences are all around us. We don't have to argue about whether is history happening. I mean, if obviously it's happening, we're embedded late in it. But it's caused by the fact that ordinary nature, the nature of glaciers, chipmunks, anthills, termite nests, and whale pods, has come, at least in the case of our species, under the influence of something which is literally fastened onto us and is now recreating us in its image. It's taking a monkey body and it's saying, stand it up, slide the eyes around to the front, oppose the thumb, shed the hair, enlarge the brain, put ideas into the brain, so forth and so on. I mean, we are being recast as something unimaginable to the rest of nature. And we are now fairly close to figuring out what this is. This is why we are able to talk about human-machine symbiosis, virtual reality, downloading ourselves to the size of viruses in a nanotechnological domain, stuff like that.
So, would you say that the index of compressors to look at this current version flap is taking, which has to do with contact team and designation, or like Mary Harvard, the psychiatrist who's actually been in the book now, the number of people he's worked with who claim to have had fertilization.
Yeah, I agree with your idea that it's an index of the depth of concrescence, though muddied by shrewd public relations types who are making a living off this stuff. I think the crop circles are a more honest indication of how close we are to the transcendental body. I interviewed the person you mentioned at Harvard for a film we did in Prague a few months ago, and
His name was?
I'm avoiding. And I had to ask him halfway through the interview, I said, well, do you detect anything in your own psychological makeup which makes you unfit to be doing this work? That was after he told me that he'd interviewed 500 women who had had fetuses removed from their bodies by space people. And he said, you know, the amazing thing about this is there are no physical scars at all. And I said, well, what does this suggest to you? And he said, advanced surgical techniques of which we have no knowledge. And I'm just, my craft detector went AWOL on that answer. The rules of evidence are not in suspension for the new age. And, you know, people who recall their lifetime as the barber of Nefertiti or whatever have serious problem with what I call the rules of evidence. They don't seem to have ever heard of Occam's razor, which you study logic for 10 minutes and they tell you about Occam's razor. Do you all know what this is? It's a simple idea. Keep it next to you. Hypotheses should not be multiplied without necessity. And there are a lot of unnecessary hypotheses running around, especially in the New Age domain. I would study the impregnation effect more as an example of mass hysteria because, you know, being in the position that I am in, supposedly a revered teacher and a person of great insight and all this hoopla and crapola, you occasionally get invited to dinner with the movers and shakers, and then you hear what's said when not on stage. And I have to tell you, there's enough cynicism to satisfy a Renaissance pope among these people. They are taking the rest of us for a ride in many cases.
Well, Danny and I last night were discussing like what this transcendental object. We were enumerating a list of things that it could possibly be, and as you say, the casted reflection and so forth. How is it that, say, for example, the ayahuasqueros, in Pablo Amaringo's drawings, there's a UFO motif in one of his drawings. What is that?
You mean, do they see UFOs?
What are they? What is it that they see? When is it? Because they specifically identify this motif as separate from the rest of the drawings in one of Shaman's drum magazines, I believe.
Well, I'm giving the UFO a slightly different status than this stuff I'm dumping on. I think the UFO is real, or that there is a real phenomenon. The problem is, what is the phenomenon? And it's why someone who sees a spinning disk in the sky assumes then an entire theology about friendly extraterrestrials coming to help us out. Well, why do they assume that? What they've seen is a spinning disk in the sky, for crying out loud. Maybe what they saw was a spinning disk in the sky. There are two phenomena here which are entangled inextricably and unfortunately for the intellectually honest. There's the UFO. Who knows what that is? And then there's the UFO community. And the UFO community is just fraught with the most crack-brained, peculiar, self-serving, unstable, mush-minded group of people you would ever hope to get together in one place. I mean, it's like a magnet for screwballs. I mean, people who like to wear diamond tiaras and give themselves funny names, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the tremendously fascinating and ambiguous phenomenon of strange things seen in the sky. I mean, I went through this, I'm not talking as an outsider. I had a UFO encounter that was a deeper encounter than most of the people who run around pontificating about UFOs. And I will, at the risk of boring you yet again with this story, tell the story. I was in the Amazon. I was having all these revelations about time and one thing and another. And I noticed a place in the sky where there was a spectrogrammatic diffraction of some sort. It wasn't a rainbow, it was a colored smudge in the sky. And I was lightly but continually intoxicated on mushrooms during this period, and it said, "Watch there." It was in the southwest, and I really didn't need to be told, but it said, "Watch there." So I sat up one night, all night, on this rock by a lake, watching the southwest. And around 4:30 in the morning, with essentially a perfectly clear sky, except that off the Amazon jungle, local mist rises. And so about 1.5 miles away from me on the horizon was a line of what looked to me like a little fog bank. And as light broke over this situation, I noticed, I couldn't tell whether it had been doing this or it began doing it as things got lighter, but I noticed that this fog bank was rolling in place, like a pencil rolled between your fingers, which I had never seen a fog do that. I thought, what a strange thing. And as I watched it stretched out across the horizon, it gently broke into 4 equal-sized pieces. So now I'm looking at 4 gray lenticular clouds spaced out along the horizon about 1.5 miles away from me across this lake. So I'm watching, and I'm getting eager, and I'm getting excited. And as I watch these 4 lenticular clouds, 2 and 2 merge. Now I'm looking at 2 denser, grayer, dark gray, darker than storm clouds, these 2 things on the horizon. And as I watch, the 4 became 2, the 2 become 1. And at that point, faintly, I could hear the whee, whee, whee sound of 1950s science fiction UFOs, a la The Day the Earth Stood Still, They Came from Outer Space, so forth and so on. And I see, my God, this thing is starting toward me, and the sound is getting louder. And at that point, there was like a complete conversion in an instant, and my whole body went cold, and I realized they're coming for me. This is it, you know. Prepare to be beamed up, Scotty. And everybody was asleep in a hut about 70 feet up this mud embankment. I was down by the river and the lake, and I said, and it flashed in my mind, I have to get a witness. There must be a witness. And I looked over my shoulder at the mud bank. The thing was coming at me. I half stood up. My knees were so weak. I sat back down, and I just prepared to depart this planet, this dimension. And as it came, I could see it, and it was getting closer and closer. I could see rivets on the underside. I could see the running lights. And as it got closer and closer, I realized that what I was looking at was the end cap of a 1932 Hoover vacuum cleaner. The very end cap that George Adamski had suspended on a piece of nylon thread in his garage and photographed with his Brownie Instamatic to produce the famous UFO photograph of the UFO with the 3 balls on the underside and the ribbing going around, right? That photograph has been utterly debunked. Computer analysis of it by modern techniques, it's bullshit. And there it was, 40 feet in diameter, coming at me across the Amazon treetops. Well, then, and I just went bananas at that point, and then it passed over not more than 200 feet above my head. Turning slowly, I could see the 3 balls, I could see everything. I could see it. And I understood then that what it was more shocking than a real UFO, because it had its disconfirmation built into it. I was having an experience which you couldn't tell anybody about. What would the editor of We Love UFOs magazine say if you told him that story? He'd say, "Get out of here. You know, we don't print stories like that. We're interested in real UFOs."
Did it impart information to you of some sort? Because apparently you've been knighted the person to speak about mushrooms in such a way that you're actually, and some people do say that Terence McKenna may be an alien being himself incarnate.
Well, only people who are in litigation with me. I think what it was telling me, it was a perfect Zen lesson. It was saying, don't believe in UFOs. They're the end caps of 1932 Hoover vacuum cleaners, expand to 40 feet in diameter and flying through your mind.
So you have to question everything.
Yeah, it's saying, you know, you can't replace one stupid hypothesis, there aren't UFOs, with another stupid hypothesis, we're being visited by benevolent creatures from another world. You have to get a little more depth here if you want to be the alien ambassador. Yeah. Well, the crop circles, I'm now less sure about the crop circles. What I liked about them was that they appeared at a certain point in time, and then each year there were more of them. And I figured that we could take how many there are each year and draw a curve and reach a conclusion about how far away in the future the source of them was. Because if they are, it's almost as though the UFO leaves no trace. I mean, the burn marks on the ground, but already you're into dubiousness, because who has ever seen these burn marks? Only the editors of these UFO magazines and their willing sycophants. I mean, you and I have not seen these burn marks. We've seen photographs of funny stuff on the ground, and we're told that's it. The crop circle leaves a trace that is enduring. But the problem I have with the crop circles, and it's odd how you never hear this discussed, is that nobody has ever seen one come into existence. We get before, and we get after, but how come we never get during? Do they appear instantly? If they appear instantly, that would be pretty convincing. Just glance, it's not there. Glance, it's there. You would figure, yeah.
There's the guy who's doing a lot of the research is Collins, Andrews, doing a lot of research on this. And I've got a recording. And this is basically how he described it. They were waiting and setting up in this area to, try and record some of this going on, and this is over in Europe, and all of a sudden, the recorders are running, and all of a sudden they all stand up because they're just being incredibly strange, powerful sounding buzz of some kind that comes from far away, it just comes zooming up and comes past them over this little rise that's next to them. Okay? And it takes them all of maybe, 45 seconds or a minute to get to the top of the rise, and they're on the other side of the rise, and the crop circle that wasn't there when it started setting up. So apparently, and Richard Hoagland talks about this too.
Don't get me started.
Okay.
Don't get me started. Bad works of art on a scale of miles are not what we should expect from intelligent visitors from the stars. Here's what isn't it a little weird? First of all, let me say, I'm open-minded about crop circles. But let's also not be silly. Isn't it a little peculiar that this phenomenon appears within driving distance of the apartments of the people most likely to chronicle and proclaim it as a manifestation of telluric energy from another dimension? In other words, what if it had been happening in Turkmenistan? Then you would have something, but then how would John Michel and Colin Andrews and all these people have been able to make a living off of it? There are a number of things that are really weird about the crop circles. First of all, we're talking southern England here. The place is littered with RAF bases, nuclear weapons depots, intercontinental missile delivery systems, so forth and so on. And we're asked to believe that the Ministry of Defense is utterly unconcerned about the fact that the airspace of Great Britain is being violated night after night after night by a mysterious agency that, if it can snap the stem of a wheat stalk, could throw the switch on an electrical device of some sort. The British establishment is utterly unconcerned by the crop circle.
They're not necessarily sure from above.
Well, but wherever it's coming from, if you had a nuclear weapons depot, I think you would be Johnny at the raffle to find out what's going on.
Didn't you read, like last year, the year before, like these two guys came forward and said that they perpetrated a hoax and something?
Right, and all that did was muddy the waters. Well, it did one good thing. It finished the "it can't be done by human beings" position. We now know, Rupert and all these people, Rupert, believe it or not, is the plant pathologist who serves on the board of the Cereologist, which is the main publication that is booming this. They held a contest in July where you paid £50, you were assigned a 5-acre plot, you had from 10 at night until 4 in the morning. There were, I think, 16 entries. Everybody was given the same design, and at dawn, judges helicoptered over the sites and then made a ground inspection, and 3 of the contestants produced crop circles that were indistinguishable from the real thing. Beautiful crop circles. And I'm getting this from believers. This is what Rupert reluctantly informed me of. I think that, and one theory is that it's a particle beam weapon being tested from space. But tested 750 times in the last 18 months in the same small part of England?
Never cover their track.
I don't know. I came up with 2 theories that do not require telluric intervention or friendly extraterrestrials. First theory. a whole lot of people. First of all, it's killed the UFO industry in England. You can't give away UFO sightings at this point. So all of these people, you know, it all is happening near Glastonbury and down where the old earthworks are. It's occurring in an area where there is the largest concentration of people likely to hail it as a paranormal phenomenon on the surface of the earth, and they have done so. They have made outrageous statements like no human being could do this, it's impossible to explain this, so forth and so on. Well, now imagine that something like MI5, you know what that is, it's the English CIA, looks at the rise of paganism in Britain, you know, earthworks, channeling, all of this stuff, and says, this threatens church and state. We need to create a disinformation situation. Let's lure these people out onto a limb, way out onto a limb, and then let's cut the limb off. So what you do is you create this pseudo-paranormal phenomenon. You get John Mitchell, Colin Andrews, all these people to proclaim its weirdness, and then you reveal that it's easily duplicated. That's one theory. In other words, the British establishment is undercutting paganism by luring these people into saying too much. But that's not my favorite theory.
Well, that's highly probable. What's your favorite?
Oh, my favorite theory is much better. Because the question is, how do you make these things? When you actually go to the crop circles, what do you see? This is a Sherlock Holmes type deal. You know, Sherlock Holmes could handle the crop circles with his arm tied behind his back, I think. When you go to the crop circles, here it is, the crop circle. Mysterious, unearthly, portending who knows what. And what else is there? Well, the press and the sightseers and yourself and an extraordinary number of Japanese tourists. Now,
Economics.
you're getting close. The Japanese press has followed the crop circle phenomenon more avidly than any other press in the world outside of England. Every new crop circle, it appears, photographs and discussion. It is huge in Japan. Japan, they're obsessed with this stuff. I think that what might be going on, this is certainly a lot more likely than extraterrestrials or telluric forces. Do you all know what MITI is? It's the Ministry of Trade and Industry. It's this enormous organization in Japan which coordinates technological development and marketing. It's what we're talking about when we say Japan Incorporated. I think that this is a MIDI research project, and that these Japanese tourists, which are ever present at these sites, some of them are drawn from a centuries-old tradition of ninja stem snappers who, at a given signal, are able to hurl away their Nikons, rush into the corn, and in the matter of a few minutes create these things, then put their cameras back on and their sunglasses back on, and take up their deep cover as Japanese tourists. Now, why would MITI do such a thing? What's in it for them? It's a semiotics project. They are studying the impact of symbols on the Western mind. The closest thing to these crop circles, if you look at a complete encyclopedia of them, are the pottery marks made by master potters in medieval Japan on their ceramics. Almost all of the crop circles, except the frivolous ones, like, for instance, how about the fact that the symbol of the Cereologist magazine was done in one of these things.
I was at that one with Ruben.
Yeah, these things, it's got humor behind it. I mean, it's a grand silliness of some sort. I'm willing to be proven wrong. I grappled with it like everybody else for 6 months, but the density of flakiness around it is incredible. And the number of people whose private agendas are being served by this. I mean, if it were happening north of Hudson Bay, there'd be no money in it. You have to be able to drive there from central London in order for it to work. Well, then people always say, well, but it's happening all over the world, my good man. Haven't you heard? Show me. Show me. It's not happening all over the world. Some clumsy attempts appeared in Kentucky, and there was something in Germany, and so forth and so on. But it's really hair-raising to be among these people and to see how uncommitted to finding out what it is they are, and how totally committed they are to preserving it from rational inspection. They don't want to talk about, any alternative other than whatever the pet theory of the week is about how it's happening. Now, I see it as part of the ingression into novelty. Things are going to get weirder and weirder. There's no doubt about that. But it doesn't mean that there is a conscious extraterrestrial agency. I mean, I find it pretty weird that there are 500 women who think they had fetuses removed from their bodies by extraterrestrials. That's so weird that suggesting that it's true seems a little like overkill to me. I mean, what is going on that would make a woman do that sort of thing? There's always, if you're a careful observer of one of these things, there's always, Jacques Vallée wrote about this, a residuum of absurdity that is suppressed by the witness, because the witness knows that if they told the whole story, their story is not credible. This is called, the built-in absurdity of these paranormal things. And when somebody tells you a story about a UFO encounter that does not have this element of self-contradicting absurdity in it, they're manipulating the evidence to make it seem more woo-woo-woo, I think. And I'm not a rationalist, except, I've seen things that violated the laws of physics. I believe the laws of physics can be violated. I believe there may well be extraterrestrials somewhere in the universe.
Do you believe the Voynich manuscripts may have something to do with some type of alien intelligence?
No, I think the Voynich manuscript is a solved problem, and that this guy Leo Levertov's translation is correct. What he found was, it was a Cathorite manual for the dying. That's much more exciting than trying to claim it as a book from another dimension, because now we gain an insight into what Cathorism was really about. I think there is a residuum of the irrational and the paranormal, but these things like flying saucers and Atlantis and the crop circles, they're like viruses upon the healthy body of language. There's something wrong with language and communication, because it's never as you imagine it's going to be. And people are being sold a phenomenon that if they were to go, they would discover that aspects of it were suppressed or misrepresented. The people who are dealing with the crop circles are having a great time. It's the longest drinking party on record in that part of England. I guess I should say this because I know it's a bummer to have your favorite weird thing dumped on. But my technique, which I recommend to you, is don't believe anything. If you believe in something, you are automatically precluded from believing its opposite. Therefore, you have given up a portion of your freedom, and freedom is the dearest thing we've got. You don't have to believe anything. You can just provisionally work your way through stuff. So, and then probe the edges. The edges will satisfy. I think that the proper way to contact the other is with hard-headed rationalism exercised under weird conditions. I went to India, visited some of these yoga people and accomplished saints. I'm telling you, for my money, it was hokum. There was an ulterior agenda, either having the wish to relieve you of your cash or to violate some body cavity. That was the ulterior agenda. When I went to the Amazon with the same attitude of skepticism and talked to the shamans there, they delivered the goods. If somebody, so you just investigate these things, and the key question is, what can you show me? If they've got it, they can show it. There's no mumbo-jumbo around the real thing. But if they say, oh, well, you know, the tape recordings miraculously erased themselves last night, or we'll show you, but you have to sweep up around the ashram for a dozen years to prove you're worthy. Or, you know, you are not worthy. That's the one where you head for the door. You are not worthy. The real thing is the real thing, for crying out loud. It can be displayed. It doesn't require this weird, fuzzy relationship of worth and insight and so forth and so on. And that's how I got to psychedelics. Psychedelics work. If you think that I'm bullshitting you, go home and take 5 grams of mushrooms in silent darkness, and then we'll talk. That's the sine qua non. But it'll work on demand. I'm not saying and wait 40 years or purify yourself or get your aura stitched up or any of the rest of it. It'll work. It'll blow your mind to shreds. It's real. This other stuff is just, you know, all these gurus, they need to find honest work. They need to join the rest of us in contemplating the mystery of reality. They don't know what they're talking about. If they knew what they were talking about, they wouldn't have to shuffle the deck when you're out of the room. And that's what's going on. Somebody must be outraged and insulted and terribly disappointed. Yeah.
Getting back to the DMT.
Enough of this.
You have the same experience each time you take it under similar conditions. Do other people report the same things, the same teaching machines? And how does it relate to near-death experience? On the other side.
In order. Yes, I do have the same experience each time I take it.
Did they say nice to see you again?
They say you've sent so many, but you come so rarely. And then the more interesting question, do other people see it?
Get it permission.
Yeah, do I get a permission? Do other people see it? What I've thought about this question a lot, because it's a question of communication. If they saw it, could they tell me? If they told me in their language, would I understand what they were telling me? And what I've decided is that the experience is an archetype. It's the archetype of the circus. Why? Don't ask me why. I don't know why. But, for instance, I've listened to many, many people talk about their DMT experiences, and inevitably, this is the box into which it will fit. I gave it to a woman once up in Washington, an anthropologist. It was a sub-threshold dose because she coughed. I could tell she didn't get it. And when she came down, she said, it was the saddest carnival I've ever been to. She said the rides weren't open. The tents were shuttered and there were little gum papers blowing between the stands. The circus is an interesting archetype because it has a number of facets. First of all, you have the three central rings under the big top. That's the dome. And in the central ring, there's light and color and clowns. Remember that Maria Sabina called the mushrooms the little clowns. And these clowns, the circus is for children. And when you take DMT, one of the things I didn't mention in my description of it is you have a peculiar impression of your own body geometry. Your head seems to be very large in relationship to your torso. You are, in fact, an infant in some sense. You become a child. This leads to thinking about the 52nd fragment of Heraclitus, which says, the aeon is a child that play with colored balls. Nobody knows what this saying means, but it's persisted for about 3,000 years, so it must mean something. But outside the three rings, there's another aspect to the circus. It is spun into eros, because above the center ring and up near the top of the dome is the beautiful woman with long blonde hair and the tiny, skimpy, spangled costume, and very complicated narrative-type dream, and the alarm rings, and by the time your feet hit the floor and you stagger into the shower, it's gone. It's not partially gone, it's all gone. And all you can say is, I was having this amazing dream. I have no idea what it was. The DMT thing can leave you just that quickly. And also, and I think this has a bearing on this, they have studied the production of DMT in normal metabolism, and it peaks in normal human beings between 3 and 4 a.m. This is when the deep dreaming is going on. This is when the intense REM states are being experienced. So I think that where the dead and the living get together is in the dream time. Australian Aborigines have been trying to tell us this for as long as we would listen. And also, a lot of people, it's possible to repress it very, very quickly. I think, for instance, I've seen people, one way you can tell if someone has really gotten a good DMT trip is they lay down, they become very still, but if you look closely at their face with their eyes closed, you can see that their eyes are moving wildly underneath their closed eyelids. This is because they're in REM state, and they are watching the whatever it is they're seeing. They are looking at it. I remember giving DMT to a person years and years ago, a person who might have been a candidate for the description psychologically fragile. And it was clear that she got it because she was a hash smoker, and she took 3 or 4 enormous hits, laid down, her eyes were wildly rotating around in her head. When she came out of it, said, "What was it?" Said, "It was nothing. I don't remember anything. I don't remember anything at all." And furthermore, I don't think I want to have anything more to do with you. And didn't. Well, I think that this is something that it only shows as much of it as you can stand. And some of us cannot stand much at all. This occurs with psilocybin as well. I've had experiences with psilocybin where I've said to it, after hours of hallucinations of one sort and another, I finally say, you know, what I'm really interested in is your true essence. Can you show me what you are for yourself rather than for me? What are you for yourself? Well, then it's just like a cold wind blows through and black velvet curtains begin to rise. And after 30 seconds of this, you just say, that's enough of what you are for yourself. Because you can tell it's headed in a direction you can't tolerate at all. You can't stand. I have a friend who said of psilocybin, he said, my goal every time I take it is to stand more of what it really is. And this is why it's incredibly kind to beginners. Beginners basically need have no fear if they will regulate the dose reasonably, because it wants to recruit you. And so it says, you know, here it is, whatever you wanted, aliens, outer space, elves, erotic imagery, here it is. Doesn't this feel safe? See, we're not so bad. We're your friends. We're not like all the others. Come back soon. It's after you gain familiarity with it where it says, you know, there are aspects to me that we've never really talked about. Say, oh yeah? Like what? Well, like this. No. Let's go back to the Disney loop.
How close is the DMT that you smoke compared to the brain DMT that we all have running through? Is there different, like NN dimethyltryptamine and what's in our brain?
No, it's the same thing.
Exactly the same.
It's the same thing. DMT it occurs in two forms, the salt and the hydrochloride, and both forms occur. Well, no, I'm not sure that both forms occur in metabolism, but the only difference is that one is water soluble and the other isn't.
So basically, then again, we are holding. Then I mean, if DMT is illegal, then what we have in our brain running through us is considered illegal.
Yeah, we are potentially bustable. You know, in light of what I said, one of the most interesting frontiers that the New Age has brought forward that I think bears more serious study than the channelings of Amenhotep's barber and all that, is lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
Lucid dreaming, if it, I don't know whether those people, I don't know those people personally, I don't know what their motivation is, but if it's true that you can take control of the dream state, then this would be something worth spending even a lot of time on. Because the dream state is more like the tryptamine geography than anything else. One of the most fascinating things about DMT that should certainly be mentioned as long as we're exhausting ourselves on this subject is once you've had DMT, once you've smoked it and this experience has occurred, you can have a dream years later in which you're with a bunch of people and something's going on and you enter the atrium of the Hotel California and you take a floor to the basement or something, and then you're in a room with people and someone whips out a little glass pipe and you smoke it and it happens. It doesn't sort of happen. It happens 100%. That means that's exciting data, because that means that we have the wherewithal to trigger this experience in ourselves on the natch, at least while we're asleep. And I presume that with sufficient patience and subtlety and biofeedback equipment, and I don't know what you would take, but if you spend $1 million, you could probably deliver it on time. We can trigger this most intense of all hallucinogenic ecstasies, most boundary dissolving of all possible human experiences on the natch. But we have to somehow find our way to the button. And apparently, in normal waking consciousness, it isn't there. I spent a lot of time, I didn't mean to be so flip about the UFOs. I've spent years trying to think about the UFOs and studied all the theories. One that I still may be part of the truth is maybe it is so that we generate and sequester DMT somewhere in our brain, and under unusual situations, this sequestered DMT can suddenly be dumped into the brain fluid or into the bloodstream, and then you have a DMT experience or some kind of quasi-DMT-like experience. Because I read an interesting paper a few years ago. I can't remember the name of the guy who wrote it. It was an anthropological paper. It was called The Felt Presence in Unusual Environments. And it talked about how it is apparently a basic trait of human beings to, when in the wilderness, especially unfamiliar wilderness, people sense something there. The felt presence in unusual environments. Well, it may be that, now, imagine if you're in the wilderness in a situation not entirely familiar to you, so that you're edging up toward this felt presence thing, and suddenly DMT stored in your brain is, for some reason, perhaps a pathological reason that it shouldn't happen, but it's shunted into your brain. Well, now, suddenly, you feel there's something here, there's someone here, there's someone with me. The hair on the back of your neck stands up. And then you see coming toward you a disturbance in your perceptual field. Now, you're supposed to be alone. There isn't supposed to be a disturbance in your perceptual input, but there is. You are alarmed. It may be dangerous. You must identify what this is. Well, every one of us carries around inside us a cultural inventory of what weird events might possibly be. If you're a medieval peasant farming the hills of Tuscany, and this happens, you immediately conclude that it's the Virgin, or it's an angel. And lo and behold, as it comes closer, it clothes itself in heavenly raiment, and it is the Virgin. And so you are encountering the Virgin. Well, now, what if you're a Southern California steeped in the religious faiths of Malibu, and this happens to you? You will conclude, my God, it's a UFO. Haven't you been with people who every airplane that flies over, they're willing to proclaim is an extraterrestrial intervention? It's because this explanation lies very close to the surface. When we don't know what something is, we want to know, we want to English it, we want to name it, and we grasp the nearest thing at hand. It's very important to avoid this reflex in order to see what is it really. What is it really? Let it be what it is. Yeah.
4 small points. On that one, I noticed I did a book in 73 on the slap that was going on then, and I interviewed perhaps 500 people. And in a large number, they start with it's a traditional poetic to a note, it's called negative parallelism, where you identify, negate, identify, negate. So you start, it looked like a low-flying plane. No, it was too low. It looked like a semi with its out-of-order lights on. And only as the third or fourth identification, which is traditional to classic tropes of the 13th century, would they identify it as, oh my God, it's a UFO. Point one. Another one, the strangest one was an old lady in Texas, and I said, "How did you know it was a UFO?" And she said, "Because it had UFO printed on the undercarriage."
I like that.
The next one was a judge. I went down to Pascagoula, the Hickson and Parker.
Famous
episode.
case.
I've got to see them again because I want to see how they've done over there.
Very interesting case.
And the judge and clerk of courts and two other people were riding home during that period, and two of them in the car saw a UFO and the others couldn't see it. So let's say one saw it because of an EMT drop at some time. Another was his clerk and decided he better see it. And the other two were just straight. Last point. There's a guy called Orfeo Angelucci, who was an early contactee who gave me a useful handle on kind of talk about working the edges. He was out and he met the captain of the ship, and the ship's captain said during the interview, "Would you go and get me a bottle of soda pop?" And then they went on with their event. So I began looking for what I called the soda pop factor. You know, that's where there was an element or more than one element absolutely unrelated to the story. That was somehow a touch of human
an intrusion.
Intrusion, yeah. Unnecessary intrusion.
Well, let me say one thing about it. You don't even have to be cynical to the point of believing in the Pascagoula situation that the second guy saw the UFO because he was the clerk. These drug molecules have resonant rings. They are aromatics. It may be that there's a pheromone thing happening here, and that a state of mind can be transferred to from one person to another through body odor. This may be how the states of telepathy are achieved on psilocybin, because you do smell funny, and this smell may be more than funny. It may be carrying information. There's a very interesting phenomenon that is well documented called allophrenia. Do you all know what allophrenia is? Allophrenia is when a friend of yours gets put in the hospital for schizophrenia, and you, being a good Samaritan, decide to take them a box of candy, and during the visit to your friend, you behave so bizarrely that you don't get to leave the hospital. Allophrenia. Schizophrenic behavior on the part of non-schizophrenics in the presence of schizophrenics. I've experienced this. I had a friend, I visited him in the hospital, and the way, here's how it works, it's really interesting. I visited my friend in the hospital. He was nutty as a fruitcake, but he was my friend, and he was talking 90 to nothing, so I wanted to communicate with him. So instead of saying to every single statement he made, "I don't understand you, you're nuts, that makes no sense whatsoever," I began trying to agree with him, trying to understand him, and then it sort of got the momentum of a game going where he would say, "You know, I'm really Sirhan, and I would say, "Yes, but your teacup is on backwards." And a doctor walking into this situation would have a hard time telling who's nuts and who's not. Well, was that because I decided to play along with him, or why did I decide? There was an ambiance that gave permission for erratic, irrational, peculiar behavior. And I suppose if you were borderline schizophrenic in that situation, that's all it would take to push you over the edge.
Do you think, I know you're probably thinking about that Wiener's ECM stuff.
Yeah.
You told me about it yourself. But I find I just recently read all those papers again, and I think you're really right that there is some it's what he calls the olfactory subconscious, that there is perception below what is olfactorily normally perceived, and this is profound information transformation, messages that are perceived and stuff. Yeah, I think that there could be something to it.
Yeah, people who study human behavior have noted that when a person enters a room full of people, unconsciously, the first thing they do is they take a deep breath. What that's doing is giving you a whole bunch of information. And you can tell, you can say, I walked into the room and the vibes were terrible because Herbert had just slugged Alice 3 minutes before and everybody was freaking out about it. Or I just walked into the room and I could tell something weird was happening, but I couldn't figure out what it was. And what it was Alice and Fred heard me coming, so he took his hand out of her blouse as I opened the door. This kind of thing. In other words, information that is coming in through the olfactory senses. There are psychiatrists who diagnose schizophrenia by what they call the sniff test. You know, this is one of the most subtle and difficult of all mental dysfunctions to diagnose, and some people just lean over your anterior fontanelle and take a hit and say, him to therapy, her to release, and him to medication, because they are confident enough that the smell will do it. There's even one theory of schizophrenia that holds that what schizophrenia is a dysfunctional pheromone system, so that you, who are the schizophrenic, your real problem is that you smell funny, not stink. People aren't aware of that, but it's that there's something about you that causes people to treat you strangely. And you, reacting to being treated strangely by people, get weirder. And they, reacting to you getting weirder, treat you more and more strangely. So what you have here is a feedback cycle that ends with nets being dropped over you and you taken away. But the original cause was that there was you were giving off a chemical which made people treat you in a way that caused you to react to them adversely, and that started the cycle going.
Or they say that you perceived olfactory hallucinations, not that you just smelled weirdly, but that you perceived.
Oh, that you were misinterpreting incoming.
That's right. There's a whole
olfactory
section when it talks about olfactory hallucinations.
The reason we're talking so much about this is because if you look at these pheromone molecules and lay them next to these drug molecules, it's all one family. These are all small planar molecules. There's even one area where it comes together pretty spectacularly. That is, in the pineal gland of human beings, there's a great deal of, something like 12% of the brain's energy is being channeled into the pineal gland. Well, if you know anything about evolutionary theory, you know that you don't waste energy in unnecessary functions or you become extinct. So there's a reason why 12% of the brain's energy is being channeled into the pineal gland, though we don't know what it is. Well, then when you look at what's going on in the pineal, a neural compound called adenosine is being transduced by light into melatonin. Well, this compound, adenosine, in ordinary biochemical nomenclature, is 6-methoxytetrahydroharmalan. It's a near relative of the compounds in the ayahuasca. Well, so then a reasonable question is to ask, well, then what's happening to all this melatonin that is being produced in the pineal? Well, then if you tag it and follow its path through the metabolic system, you discover that the stuff is making its way quite directly to the surface of the skin. And then it's volatilizing away. What's happening here? A hallucinogenic molecule is being turned into a... and in the very center of the brain, and this pheromone is then hurrying on its way to the surface of the skin, where it volatilizes off and affects the ambient social environment in which you're living. This begins to look like a system of neurotransmitters and neuroregulators that operate not only within the body, but on the surface of the body and in the ambient social environment. Yeah.
I don't know if this relates to, I'm not a chemist or anything like that. There was this stuff on the market called tryptophan, I believe.
Right, it's an amino acid.
Amino acid, and it was taken off the market not too long ago.
Yes.
And supposedly it made you dream. Your dreams more clear or more vivid, something like that.
Well, it's the precursor for DMT. If you wanted to make DMT in the laboratory, tryptophan would be one of the pathways that you could start from. The reason tryptophan was taken off the market, there was a lot of confusion initially, but it was a poisoned batch. It turned out all of the world's tryptophan was coming from one enormous stainless steel vat near Nagoya, and that it had been infected by a bacterium. And so, we're stuck with the fact that tryptophan will probably never again be available in health food stores, but it wasn't tryptophan that was the culprit. I knew someone whose life was completely messed up by
From the tryptophan?
From the poisoned tryptophan.
From the poisoned tryptophan. So, by taking the tryptophan, then it caused DMT to be more...
Well, no, saying it that way is saying too much. We don't know that. All we can say is tryptophan is an amino acid. It's used in the biosynthesis of many different compounds, including DMT. DMT peaks when dream states are peaking, and tryptophan does seem to induce deeper dreaming.
So it sort of correlates.
It's a rational case. We could sit here, sometime we could have a weekend entirely devoted to thinking of simple experiments that could be done in the laboratory with and without human beings if only these things weren't illegal. I mean, there is so much to be learned and so little work being done because it's not sanctioned. I mean, my brother is a pharmaceutical chemist, pharmacologist, plant physiologist, and his professional life is very touch and go because he's known to be a hallucinogen man, and they don't hire you, they don't publish you, they don't fund you, they don't want to know. You have to be a very dedicated person to stick with hallucinogenic chemistry when you could get over into something else and make a lot of money.
So you don't see a conspiracy then with the tryptophan being taken off the market because it made dreams being more vivid. You see it's just a bad batch. I mean, I made the connection without just thinking that. I'm not a conspiracist, but it seemed to me awfully funny that was taken off and was being made by one batch and that batch got tampered with or whatever.
Well, there may have been some form of hanky-panky, but in all fairness, there are many approaches to the synthesis of DMT. Indole is probably what most chemists would probably prefer to start from indole. And indole is an industrial precursor used in so many hundreds of ways that you could never push indole off the market. You'd have to reinvent half the pharmaceutical industry.
But where I'm going with that is, I'm talking about just being able to get it from a health food store. Here it was tryptophan, and it made your dreams more vivid. I don't know if that's what people are using it for, I don't think so, but here it was, so maybe they felt that people were dreaming too much, and so they were having too vivid dreams that, hey, we can't have this anymore. We've got to sort of get it off the market. Maybe.
I think probably as long as you're asleep, they're fine about it. It's when you wake up that they get nervous. As long as you keep your eyes closed or you're glued to the boob tube, they're quite happy to minimalize you, marginalize you, and make you larval. Yeah.
I was thinking about this thing with the elves and so forth, and I was also thinking about it in relationship to, let's say you smoke DMT, you have the experience, you can put the term elves on them or speculate that what we have in various mythologies or thought systems, elves, refers to that. I was wondering what you think about, other types of deities that people may
encounter in some sort of visionary experience, either with hallucinogens or not? I mean, what do you make of that? Do you have more of an archetypal interpretation, or do you think that they exist in some hyperdimensional reality in some form? Or I'm just curious what you make of that.
I guess I have an archetypal interpretation. I recall from some book of Robert Anton Wilson's where he suggests, he says you should pray to the Blessed Virgin Mary every day and make offerings to her and put up her picture until she appears. Then switch to Shiva and do it till Shiva appears. Then Mickey Mouse. And just keep doing this until you satisfy yourself that none of these things are more real than any other, and that whatever their ontological status, they're all equal in ontological status. Apparently the human brain is far more malleable than we can conceive of or imagine. We become imprisoned within a language and an ideology, and it literally becomes our reality. And yet it isn't our reality. It's just something provisional. I've not had that experience. I prayed for years as a kid, but perhaps the Agenbite of Inuit was already present in me and making it impossible for me to succeed.
But in the case of the elves, there's sort of a cultural archetype of the elves, but at the same time you seem to be saying that there is a deeper reality that this is based on. In other words...
Well, and the DMT elves are a lot weirder than the Disney elves. The Disney elves are really sanitized. These things are pretty frightening in a way. I mean, they are if you let yourself be frightened, because how can I put it? They play too rough. They are not mean, but they're not careful either. It's like hanging out with a gang, you know? As long as you're their friend, you really feel, aren't I cool? Look who I'm hanging out with. But then you realize if you said the wrong word or made the wrong move, everybody would turn and look at you and just... I recently wrote the introduction for a new edition of Evans Vent's book, The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries. And if you're interested in elves, this is the book to read. You all know who Evans Vence was. He was the great Tibetologist but as a student at Cambridge in 1913, before he went to Tibet, he did his doctoral thesis. 1913 this was. And he went around to Brittany and Wales and Ireland, to the old people. I don't think he talked to anybody under 80. And he said, tell me stories about fairies. And he collected the most amazing stories about fairies and fairy encounters. And I learned from rereading that book that, you know, the Christian notion of purgatory, which is a place where you go that is neither heaven or hell, where you do time for minor infractions and then you get moved on to heaven. This idea was created, I always assumed that it was dreamed up by some bishops of Rome, some synod or something. It was dreamed up by St. Patrick to convert the pagan Irish, to convince them that fairyland was part of the Christian map. And he was so successful in converting the pagan Irish that when letters went back to Rome describing how he did it, purgatory became a general doctrine of the church, and then it was used very successfully to convert the pagan Slavs. So purgatory is fairyland dressed up in Christian terminology. And what is the idea of fairyland? It's the idea that the dead live all around us, linger among us as disincarnate souls, and the fairies that Evans Vance was describing were very ambiguous morally. I mean, sometimes they would only sour the milk. But, you know, their favorite concern of fairies is UFO freaks pay attention, stealing babies. That's what fairies like to do. I don't know about surgically ripping off fetuses. That seems to be a modern touch. But in Ireland, people in the countryside do not leave babies, small babies, unattended in their cribs for fear of fairy theft. And the fairies substitute. They don't just leave an empty crib. They leave a withered, strange little creature that is supposed to fool the human beings. And whenever there is a child born who is wasting and old-looking and undersized, there's always the assumption that there was a healthy baby there, but now there's been a fairy switch. Fairies respond to riddlery. This has to do with this thing about language and the strange relationship of the Irish to intoxication, fairies, and language suggests that here we might have a restricted gene pool that has somehow indemnified itself in the direction of these peculiar concerns. Present company accepted.
What was the name of that book again?
The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries by Evans Vance. At least a couple of final points, which is, you know, what is this all good for? I think what it's good for, I think the mystery that we're making our way toward, much more of which will be revealed later as we live into the next 20 years, is that we have lost connection to a very important part of reality, which I call the Gaian mind, but which I think is more popularly understood as the goddess consciousness. But the goddess is not as envisioned at Ephesus, you know, a woman studded with breasts. The goddess is the living earth. It is not to be anthropomorphosed into some kind of human or quasi-human form. And when we were taking mushrooms on the plains of Africa, before the invention of agriculture, as nomads, we were rocked in the cradle of the goddess. And the, you know, differences between men and women, between parents and children, between those who had much, if anybody had much, and those who had little, and between human beings and the animal and vegetable kingdom were minimal, because everything operated in the light of this reference experience, boundary dissolution, and a sense of the intelligence of the earth. Now, we are so alienated from the intelligence of the earth that when we encounter it, we assume it came from halfway across the galaxy to rescue us. It isn't from across interstellar space. It's something that is partially in ourselves and partially in the world around us. And if we could but clear the prejudices of materialism from our approach to the world, most especially from our language, which by its subject-object bias, by its linear syntax, and by God knows what else that's built into it, hopelessly precludes us from contacting this reality. If we could clear all that away, we would discover, you know, a dimension of immense support and affection for human beings and for our enterprises. But as long as we pursue the destruction of the earth and the elaboration of materialist ideology and the suppression of psychedelic states and the suppression of the feminine, we are going to be alienated, feel abandoned, and operate in an ambiance of rampant pathology. So, to my mind, the hallucinogens are a call to return to the archaic style, to recapture the tools, techniques, languages, and attitudes that existed and flourished on this planet, before AD 10,000. And we must do this. If we don't do this, then we are setting ourselves up for a very unhappy future. We are living in a very unhappy world. Maybe your world is not unhappy, but, tell that in Bosnia, tell it in Somalia, tell it to the AIDS-infected masses of Africa. The apocalypse is no longer a rumor. It's arrived in many parts of the world. And we, as the children, the inheritors of the culture which created this catastrophe, and as the people who are still still living on high ground, as the waters of poverty, epidemic, disease, and misery rise ever higher, have a certain obligation to respond to this. Moral decency demands it, and we can no longer tolerate the evolution of consciousness, the exploration of our relationships to each other, and the source of meaning itself to be regulated, stigmatized, and degraded by the most frightened, the least educated, the least balanced, and the least caring among us. And this is what we've got at the present moment. The male dominator mentality is in the process of running us and all life on this planet into extinction. I don't have answers. That must be clear by now. I have questions and offer techniques. And there's nothing new about these techniques. They have been around for 100,000 years. And for 90,000 of those 100,000 years, they worked very well. And we existed in harmony with the rest of nature, fully human, fully able to philosophize, argue, love, riddle, perform theater, make masks, so forth and so on. But in the last 10,000 years, we have fallen into a pathology. And it's because the umbilical connection to the mind and nature has been severed, lost, pissed away, ignored, degraded, turned away from. It is a psychedelic relationship to these plants. Without that, you are not yourself. Without that, you are half human. And this is how we behave. We behave as though, we have a soul, but it's stapled in Yeats' immensely compelling phrase to the body of a dying animal. This needs to be corrected, reconstructed, addressed. Otherwise, we are going to go into the books, if there are books, and into the cosmic record, which there surely is a cosmic record, as jerks, lame, didn't get it, couldn't put it together. And this would be a terrible legacy, because we are not going into these crises in a state of total anesthesia. We have the answers. We have the political machinery to do something about this. We have the sense of crisis. We have the goodwill and affection for each other. But we are somehow unable to put all this together in a configuration that would allow us to change our minds, admit that history was a bad idea, that science betrayed us, that it's a tale told by an idiot, and to strike out in a new direction. We're like the frog in the proverbial pot who never moves as the temperature climbs toward the boiling point. Sooner or later, you have to just get up on your hind legs and say, enough already. Now, maybe this is beginning to happen, and maybe it isn't. But it's not for us to judge as spectators at a hockey game. It's for us to get in and roll up our sleeves and participate in. Do what you think is right. Think about what you think is right. And once you've thought about it, then do it. And it doesn't have to fit in with my program or my agenda. I have a deep and abiding faith that Mother Nature will sort out the options, and from the offerings of all of us, select those that will be salvational and salutary for all the rest of us. But if you don't act, you didn't participate. I mean, this is not a road show, you know. It's your life, your planet, your world, and the tools to reclaim it are present at hand. You've heard this now. Now you have to ask yourself, what are you going to do about it? That's really all I have to say, and we're finished.
Right.
So thank you very much.
All of you people who think that your consciousness ends at the boundary of your skin, I've got some news for you about the reality of the universe you're living in. There ain't no line separating you from everything that you see. Just release your mind in the big design, and the truth will set you free. I said inner and outer space are exactly the same. Yeah, you know we all hear those voices speaking inside of our brain. Yeah, and then we might have to redefine what's considered insane. Yeah, when inner and outer space are exactly the same. Now for all you people who think that it makes any sense to keep on building bombs, don't you think it's time we direct our attention to the brain behind the gun? 'Cause all that destructive energy was spawned from a spark in our mind.